You are standing in a ballroom in Las Vegas, watching strangers bid on your life. Not photographs, not memories. The actual objects. A horse and rider statue that once guarded the entrance to your own theater. A stagecoach, a country singer built by hand for your wedding day. Numbered lots now, sold to whoever raises a paddle first. 2014. Burt Reynolds is 78 years old, and he is selling the evidence that he used to be the biggest star on Earth. The question people ask about Burt Reynolds is how he lost $60 million. That is the wrong question. The real question is why a man who had everything kept building the exact machine that would take it away from him, one decision at a time. For 30 years. Start earlier than the fame. Start with a hospital bed in 1957. Burt Reynolds went to Florida State on a football scholarship, a halfback good enough that people expected something from him before he ever said a word on camera. A knee injury ended one season. He came back anyway. Then a car accident took his spleen and wrecked the same knee a second time, and the football career that was supposed to define him was simply over at 21 years old before it had properly started. Most people would have called that the end of something. Reynolds treated it as a redirection. While he was recovering, a drama teacher at a junior college in Palm Beach cast him in a play almost by accident, and the same certainty that had carried him onto a football field carried him onto a stage instead. He won a state drama award within a year. He never went back to football. That refusal to accept a closed door, the same trait that would eventually cost him everything, is also the exact trait that built him in the first place. A former stuntman he had befriended along the way, a man named Hal Needham, would later hand him a road movie script that nobody else wanted. That script became Smokey and the Bandit. Start the fame itself with the 5 years nobody has matched since. From 1978 to 1982, Burt Reynolds was voted the #1 box office star in the world. 5 years running. Not the highest paid, not the most nominated. The one people actually paid to see over and over, more than anyone else alive. It started with Deliverance in 1972, a film so raw that people still flinch at one scene decades later, and it turned a stuntman's son from Georgia into an actor. 5 years later came Smokey and the Bandit, made with his friend Sally Field for a fraction of what a studio film should cost, and it pulled in more than $100 million. He was earning $4 to $5 million a picture, at a time when that number bought a small studio outright. He had the smile, the drawl, the timing. He had, by every visible measure, won. Here is the open loop. Keep the toupee maker in your head. You will need him later. Because the man who won that hard does not stop moving, and Burt Reynolds did not stop. He poured money into a chain of restaurants that promised steady returns and delivered none, a hole that eventually swallowed something close to $30 million. Then, in 1990, with his income already thinning, he did something stranger than a bad investment. He borrowed $4 million from the television network airing his new show, Evening Shade, against money that had not been earned yet. The bet was simple. The show runs long enough to sell into syndication. The syndication money arrives, the loan gets repaid, nobody notices. Evening Shade ran 4 seasons. Syndication needs 5. The show was canceled 1 year short of the number that would have saved him, and Burt Reynolds owed the network $3,700,000 he no longer had a way to earn. By December of 1996, the math had finished. He filed for bankruptcy with $6,650,000 in assets against $11,200,000 owed. The list of creditors reads like a cross-section of an entire industry turning its back at once. The Internal Revenue Service, Chase Bank, his own talent agencies, and yes, the man who made his toupees owed $121,000 because even the illusion of Burt Reynolds had gone unpaid. Picture that filing for a second. Not the number, the room. A man who once earned more per picture than most people would see across an entire lifetime. Sitting across from a bankruptcy attorney, listing his own wigmaker as a creditor he could not pay. The restaurants were a bad bet. The television loan was a bad bet compounding a worse one. But the to-pay bill is the detail that turns a financial story into a human one, because it means the collapse had reached all the way down to the smallest prop of the persona itself, the piece nobody was ever supposed to notice. You would think the money was the wound. It was only the bruise. The deeper cut came from his marriage to Lonnie Anderson, a wedding built with enough spectacle that a custom stagecoach was part of the gift list, a horse-drawn carriage built from scratch and stamped with his own ranch name, as if two people getting married needed a piece of frontier theater to prove it was real. When it ended in 1993, the divorce did not just cost him a settlement. During the proceedings, he was paying close to $250,000 a month just to stay married to a woman he was already losing, before it finally closed with a $2 million payment and a vacation home handed over on top. That is the reason that Ballroom in Las Vegas existed at all. By 2014, with the bankruptcy long behind him but the bleeding never fully stopped, Burt Reynolds sat down with an auction house and sold the physical proof of the life he used to have. The horse and rider statue, the wedding stagecoach, piece by piece, to strangers with paddles, just to stay solvent one more year. But money was never the thing he actually regretted. Ask him, and he will tell you a different name. In his own memoir, published 2 years before he died, Burt Reynolds did not spend his final chapter on the bankruptcy or the auction. He spent it on Sally Field, the co-star from Smokey and the Bandit, the woman he was with before Lonnie Anderson, the one he called, in his own words, the one that got away. He did not blame the industry or bad luck or a network that canceled a show one season too early. He blamed himself. "I was just an arrogant jerk," he said, and she told me exactly that at the time. He spent decades as the most wanted man in Hollywood and considered the biggest loss of his life to be a relationship he talked himself out of in his 30s. And here is the turn nobody sees coming. The same stubbornness that cost him Sally Field almost cost him his last great role. In the late 1990s, a young director named Paul Thomas Anderson wanted Burt Reynolds for a film about the adult film industry in the 1970s, playing a director not unlike himself. Reynolds said no. He said no 7 times. He called the material uncomfortable, said it was not his kind of film, and meant it every time he said it. Paul Thomas Anderson did not argue about the money or the prestige. He told him one sentence: "Play it exactly like this, and it will win you an award." Reynolds finally agreed. The film was Boogie Nights, and the performance earned him his only Academy Award nomination at 61 years old, playing a version of the ambition he understood better than anyone in that room. It should have been the second act. It was not. The years after Boogie Nights were not a rebuilding. They were a slow, quiet subtraction. A quintuple heart bypass in 2010. Smaller parts, smaller paychecks, the syndication money from decades earlier long since spent. On September 6, 2018, Burt Reynolds suffered a heart attack in a Florida hospital and died at 82 years old. His niece said the family knew he had been unwell for years, and still, somehow, this was unexpected. By the end, he weighed under 100 pounds and could not walk into a room without someone holding him up. The same body that once outran police cars on camera for a living. The man who was the most wanted person in America for 5 straight years ended up needing help to stand. Think back to that hospital bed in 1957. The one that was supposed to end his story before it began. Nobody in that room could have told you it would lead to Deliverance, or Smokey and the Bandit, or a Las Vegas ballroom, or an Oscar nomination he almost refused. That is the part a highlight reel leaves out. The same refusal to accept a closed door that turned a ruined football career into an acting career was never a switch he could turn off once it had made him famous. It does not ask permission. It cannot tell the difference between a knee injury worth fighting through and a restaurant chain worth walking away from. So the real question was never how Burt Reynolds lost $60 million. Anyone can lose money. The real question is what it costs a person to be that certain of himself for that long. Certain enough to bet on restaurants. Certain enough to borrow against a show that had not sold yet. Certain enough to walk away from the one person he later admitted he actually loved. Burt Reynolds spent his entire career playing men who never doubted themselves for a second. It turns out that was never a performance. It was the one role he could not put down when the cameras stopped rolling, and it is the only one that ever actually cost him something he could not buy back with a horse and rider statue or a settlement check, or an Oscar nomination arriving 20 years too late to change the ending he had already written for himself back in that hospital bed in 1957.